Okay, so this is a conversation starter, which I don't, having never, I guess I've started conversations before, but I don't believe that I've ever given a conversation starter talk before. So I don't know exactly how great this will go. So bear with me. I guess I'll kind of give the background on this conversation starter. It's, I think, a general problem, although I only care about it through the specific lens of my own problem. But so this is going off of work that I've done with Ben Samuel, James Ryan, Liz England. I'm Adam Summerville. And so, yes, Casual Creator Cursed Problems, or How I Learned to Start Worrying and Love Designers. So to give you some background, this is my daughter, Maeve. And she is like 2.5 years old-ish. And the third night that she was alive, I had a fever dream wherein I had the vision of a programming language that I wanted to create that would enable people to do social simulations games. And so I have a very real representation of the age of my programming language here. But to give you some background, we are a group of people who care deeply about social simulation and its use in games. So, we have work such as Prom Week that both Ben and James worked on. James a little bit tangentially, amongst many other people. Bad News, of which I and James and Ben worked on. And our inspiration comes from those games, but also more classic tabletop role-playing games. And specifically, one of the questions we always had with Bad News is like, well, can I download this? And the answer was no, because it basically existed as a bunch of Python files on James's computer that no one else really knew how to run. And right, we can't package up Ben, the live actor that enacts all of these different characters throughout the town. But our goal with the system I'm going to show today is to enable Bad News likes as a genre. Right, we think that this is a space that is still rich for the mining in terms of the types of experiences that it can enable. And we want to enable a system, or a sort of an ecosystem of people developing Bad News likes, writing modules, sharing them such that they can be used in other types of experiences. Like, we don't want Bad News to be the only Bad News like to exist. And so this is how we come to KISMET, which is a language that we've been working on for the past 2 years. Right, and our end goal is to enable an ecosystem of modules that people can use and modify. And the goal is to be a sort of small-ish, casual-ish creator language, inspired by tools and languages such as Imaginarium, Tracery, Twine, and Inform. So in Kate Compton's dissertation, she states that a casual creator programming language should, or maybe should have three different properties. That it should be scaffolded, meaning that the output of the program should be visible during editing to sort of speed the grok loop, the ability to sort of understand the system that's going on. It should be unfoldable, so it should have a compact form that beginners can use with advanced features available for power users. And it should be little. It should have a compact vocabulary useful for a small domain, as opposed to being a general purpose programming language. And so, KISMET has some of these, like scaffolding. It's not really in the tool as of yet, but it's sort of runnable with the click of a button. Unfoldable, we're trying to make it more unfoldable, except we're doing social simulation, and social simulation is not exactly a small domain, and so and not exactly a completely simple domain. So it's hard to know what is beginner and what is advanced, and little, right? So it's not a general purpose language, and it's comes from a sort of inform-esque view, and is trying to be sort of natural language. So Kismet itself is made up of 3 different modules, and I might skip through this part because I know this. I'm just trying to give the background here, but there's sort of a sequence module that sort of chains together different modules. You can have initialization modules that sort of create the seeds of simulated worlds, and then the simulation modules themselves that have all the sort of rules that are going on. So, for instance, one of my favorite movies and something that I want to create is the Gosford Park simulator. So if you haven't seen Gosford Park, go and see it. Wonderful movie. It's has all these luminaries in it, and one of the things in it is that it's this family patriarch is murdered, and everybody has a motive for murder because they all hate this bastard for doing all these terrible things to them over the preceding 80 years. And so to try to model that in Kismet, we might do something like, okay, you load in the Gosford history Kismet files and the initialization, and then you run until there's one character that's found in the pattern of I'm rich and my family hates me. Then you load in the sort of manner module, i.e., so this one might be on the time scale of year to year type actions, and it might have 80 years, 100 years of history. And then finally you go to some big ball that's going to be happening at the manor, and then over the course of a week, eventually someone dies. The character is murdered. And these would have different initializations. So the manor might have a groundskeeper who has facts that are true about them, that they're poor, they're groundskeeper of different grounds. They might have locations that are created, such as the drawing room, the grounds, right? And then the simulation has definitions for, okay, well, the drawing room is a location that supports different kinds of characters, right? There might be some gentle peeps and some servants, and then sort of each turn of the simulation, different people will be cast into different roles. And then those characters that are being cast into these roles have traits that influence how likely or unlikely they are to do something, right? Someone who is louche, which is in opposition to being proper, might be more likely to do rude things and less likely to do kind things. Conversely, a person who's proper is less likely to do rude things and more likely to do kind things. Right, and then actions can pull on these, right? So the action is tagged with rude, so a louche person is more likely to take this action of commenting on someone else's appearance, after which, right, the commenter is pleased with themselves and the commented upon dislikes that person. You can also specify general purpose patterns, such as enemy of my enemy, wherein 2 people dislike a person greatly. And then we can have things that build on top of those. In fact, chaining together patterns, as in Shai's work that he presented, but also having actions that say, okay, well, I want to befriend the enemy of my enemy. So if I find this pattern, then have something else result from that. Okay, all of that was to say, I think that the language that we're trying to design might be a cursed problem. And so my introduction, and I don't know if it exists elsewhere, when I searched for cursed problem, the only reference that I could find to it was, in fact, this talk by Alex Jaffe that he gave at GDC in 2019. It's a wonderful talk. It's available on YouTube. I recommend checking it out. But he gave this talk, Cursed Problems in Game Design. And he defined a cursed problem as a problem with some inherent contradiction in its goals. So, we're trying to make a language that enables social simulation. It both reads and writes well to a sort of novice programmer or non-programmer audience. We didn't want to have a special editor or an IDE, right? We just wanted it to be text files. It could be written in any text editor. And while technically, yes, if you had like XML or something, no one really wants to sit down at Notepad and, muck around in an XML file. We wanted it to be usable by non-programmers, and we wanted it to be rich enough that social simulation experts, i.e. James Ryan, was satisfied with it. And ooh, it's spooky. Is this cursed? We have sort of currently 3 different consumers of Kismet. We have Ben and I, who are the main authors. We have James, who is the expert, and we have Liz, who is the designer, right? And all 3 of these groups have different preferences, right? So some things about Kismet that were important for us as designers, right? So that it had a free text nature. And the authors and the expert like that, right? So we wanted it to we didn't want to have a specialized tool. We just wanted it to be a text file that we could muck around in. And, James too, like that, right? Since he had been used to just writing Python code. The designer is skeptical, right? Because the designer doesn't care about that. The designer has used tools all her life that have been designed by other people and, would rather perhaps not have the ability to make a syntax error, at the potential cost of it being, clicking drag down, drop down boxes and such. Right. So we wanted it to be natural language, right? We were excited by this. We like Inform 7, and the designer really liked that from a readability standpoint, right? She could be presented with the text and read it and understand it, right? But the common problem with a natural language programming language is that you're trying to map a rigid structured language into natural language. And right, so then it comes to issues of like, well, what's the exact word here, right? Is it, is, or can I use isn't, or does it have to be is not, right? Like, things like that of trying to remember, which things in natural language map to formal language. And right, the expert didn't care about it necessarily, right? He was maybe like okay with it, but just unimportant. When it comes to being a simple social simulation, right, the idea for Kismet was not that it would be necessarily a full-featured, right? It's not capable of everything that, James Ryan with, Python could produce, but that's okay. We were willing to make a sacrifice there. For the designer, right, it was both like under-engineered and over-engineered, where it was over-engineered because there was, future-proofing taking place of trying to design for people who had never developed it, which to her, was, as a person who comes from the AAA game world, right? Like the tools that are created are the tools that are created because the designer needs them. And it's not that the tool creators are sitting there thinking like, I'm going to make a tool to do this, because they'd be doing something else as opposed to trying to plan for the future. And the expert, right, was like skeptical that the level of fidelity, was enough, right? So we have all these different audiences, and right, is it cursed? Is there some inherent contradiction in trying to make all of these different people happy, right? So some conversation starters are like, is it possible to develop a system that's general enough that it can be used in unforeseen ways but isn't over-engineered? Right, so should we just develop an IDE / authoring tool for designers who are not comfortable with coding? Are there steps we can take to increase the unfoldability of the language or to make the natural language more understandable? And right, how do we perhaps instantly show something that perhaps requires some time to generate? So all of these are sort of potential conversation starters. I don't know if I'm using this platform correctly, but